Hello there, it's the guy with the funny Russian accent again. Anyway, let me show you how I color graded these Sony ZV-E10 S-Log2 clips you just saw inside Davinci Resolve. So this is my first clip that I'm going to color grade today. And I'm gonna go for a very moody, dark and desaturated look. I actually have here a reference frame that I downloaded online. I'm not sure if this is from a movie, music video, whatnot, but I think the color grade in this one is going to work very well with my clip because the environment is more or less the same. Anyway, the first thing I'm going to do is add my basic node tree. I'm gonna go here, universal, and add this. And the first thing I have in here is a CST in and then a CST out. For the CST in, I'm going from Rec 709 to Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate because that's my project settings. And I'm using Rec 709 and not S-Log2 because I shot this clip with the ITU 709 matrix color mode, which basically means that the conversion from S-Log2 to Rec 709 already happened in camera, which means that I need to treat this clip as a normal Rec 709 clip. Now for the CST out, I'm going from Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate back to Rec 709, but this time to Rec 709 Type A because I'm using a Mac computer. Alright, here I have a noise reduction node, and honestly, I'm not going to apply any noise reduction to this clip because everything looks very clean to me. I don't see any significant amount of noise, and it's mainly because I overexposed this shot by about 1 or 2 stops, which is why I highly recommend for you to overexpose your shots with the ZV-E10 to get the best result possible. Anyway, let me delete this node. Next, I have here the exposure and contrast node. So let me add some contrast to this shot. Let me open the reference frame and somewhat match it in terms of contrast at least. Just bring it down here. Bring this up in here maybe. Go a bit lower in here. Yeah, I think something like this looks good. This is the before and after, before and after. Next, I'm going to adjust the white balance. I can definitely see a bit of red and yellow in this shot. So let me go to my color wheels and I'm going to use the offset wheel to adjust the white balance. Let me remove the red from this shot a little bit and add some blue to remove the yellow tint. This is the before and after, before and after. Next, I'm going to adjust the saturation. And honestly, because the reference frame is very desaturated, I'm not going to add saturation. Instead, I'm going to subtract it. And I'm going to use the new color slice page to do that. Because in this one, the saturation is not affecting the exposure like with the primaries page. Let me put the saturation to about here. All right, next I'm going to adjust my skin tones. Let me open the vector scope, select the qualifier and see where my skin tones at. They're okay, maybe a bit too red. Actually, I have this new tool I found, DCTL. Let me add it and show it to you. So DCTL. Add this in here and select these checkers and I'm going to enable this skin checker. And by the way, this is completely for free. I'm going to leave a link for it down below. And basically it allows you to check if your skin tones are correct or not. If your skin is yellow, it's okay, it's good. If it's green, it's too yellow. And if it's magenta, it's too red. And if I look at my skin, it's mostly in the yellow zone, but there's a bit red going on in here. So let's fix that. I'm going to go back to my skin node. And again, I'm going to use the color slice page to fix my skin tones. Here you have like a skin section to adjust the skin tone. So let's adjust it in here with the slider. Doesn't really do much, honestly. So instead, I'm going to use this red slider. This is much better. I'm going to remove some of the red from my skin, but not too much because I still want to have some red in my skin tones because it looks more natural. I think somewhere around here looks good. Let me disable this DCTL, and this is the before and after, before and after. A very minor difference, but if you look here at my nose and also here on my ear, at my ear, you can see the difference. It just removes this magenta red colors in here and in here. Anyway, next I'm going to reset this node, label it grade. And I'm going to qualify my skin and basically push everything except my skin towards these blue-green colors. Let me use the qualifier for that. Enable this overlay by pressing Shift-H, decrease the width. And basically the goal here is to only qualify my skin so I don't affect my skin tones at all. Let me add some pre-filter in here, clean the blacks a little bit, increase the blur radius, denoise it a bit, add some post filter. Now I'm going to disable this overlay, invert it because I only want to affect everything outside my skin tones. Go to the color wheels and I'm going to push the whole image towards like green blue. Let me open the reference frame, put it somewhere around here and use the offset wheel to push the whole image. Set the reds around here. The greens around here, maybe something like this. We are much closer right now. So again, this is the before and after, before and after. As you can see, it doesn't affect my skin. My skin remains the same, but everything else is pretty much going towards blue and green. All right, next I'm going to add another node in here and I'm going to label it cleanup. And with this one, I'm going to clean up the shadows because I can definitely see some red, blue hues in the shadows. And I'm going to use the log wheels to do that. So let me reduce the reds in the shadows a little bit and also the blues. And this is the before and after, before and after. It looks a bit more balanced now. All right, before I do anything else, I want to delete this node and also I'm going to delete this sharpness node because I don't want to add any sharpness to this shot. I want it to be as soft as possible. And then I'm going to add another node after the cleanup node, label it hues, and basically play around with the green, yellow colors in this shot. I'm going to use the HSL curves for that. Let me isolate my skin tones. And basically play around with the hues of the trees and leaves and stuff. Maybe also with the blues. I'm going to go to the saturation curve, add a point in here and in here, and desaturate it quite heavily, just like in the reference frame. Also, I'm going to desaturate my skin because this guy's skin in here was quite muted. Let me see. Something like this. So it's much closer to the reference frame right now. Maybe I can increase the overall saturation just slightly. Also, I want to match the hue of this dragon to this. So let me go back to the hues and I'll have to change the hues of the orange colors in here. Let me see. Something like this, just a little change really. Now another thing I can see here is that this shot has some blue green in the highlights. So let me try to add the same thing to my shot. I'm gonna go to the grade node and use the highlights here in the color wheels, the gain, and I'm going to add some blue and green. Just a little bit. Let me open the waveform here, adjust the contrast a bit more. Another thing I'm going to do is go here to the lift node and I'm going to lift up my shadows and compress my highlights because if you look at the reference frame, the shadows are much higher than in my shot. So let me do that. I'm going to use the curves for that, but I am going to disable everything except the Y, which stands for the luminosity, because I don't want to affect the saturation in the shot. So basically I'm going to bring this down. I'm going to enable the editable splines to adjust the contrast later on. Bring this down to compress the highlights and I bring this up to elevate my shadows basically. I'm going to bring this down here to add the contrast back a little bit and bring this thing up in here just to increase the contrast in the shot. Something like this. And now it looks very similar to the other shot. Maybe actually I can go back to the hues and desaturate the greens a bit more. And let me go to the lift node and decrease this a bit, increase the contrast, slightly elevate this. Let's see now. It's very similar, not 100% the same, but very, very similar. Another thing I want to actually add is this light in here. You can see that the light is coming from the top, whereas in my shot, everything looks very flat. So I think I'm going to add a window in here, basically increase the exposure or maybe the highlights in this part of the frame and decrease everything in this part of the frame. Let's clean up this node graph and I'm going to use this window node, add a circular window, zoom out, increase the size, go to my color wheels and increase the gain just a little bit. And maybe I'm going to add an outside node, name this out, and decrease the exposure on everything else just a little bit. This is the before and after, before and after. But the final thing that I'm going to do is go to the enhancer and add some bloom and film grain to make everything even more soft. Let me first disable everything, increase the output to 100%, go to the bloom, zoom in here, select this preset. Maybe something like this. This is the before and after, before and after. And then I'm going to also enable film grain, but I'm going to decrease it quite a lot. Before and after, before and after. And also maybe I'm actually going to compress my highlights even more with this film compression option. I'm going to enable this. And as you can see, it basically compresses the highlights in here. But what I mostly care about is my skin and the t-shirt in here. Let me play around with this impact. As you can see, just, you know, makes my skin look a bit more natural. Before it was somewhat like this. With this adjustment, it looks a bit more film-like. I don't want to overdo it though, because then it looks too fake. But I want to add just enough to make it look better. Something like this looks fantastic. So this is the before and after with the enhancer node. You can barely tell the difference, but if you zoom in, you can see here that it adds some bloom. And also if you look at my skin, of course, it makes the skin a bit softer. Maybe I'm actually going to come back and slightly reduce the bloom. Let's go like 9 with the bloom. Alright, I'm pretty much done with this shot. I think it looks really close to the reference frame. Not 100% identical, but really close with my set of skills. So let me disable everything and go through each node step by step. So first of all, I've applied the CST in and CST out. Then I adjusted the contrast. Then I fixed the white balance. Then I decreased the saturation slightly. Then adjusted my skin tones. Then I pushed the whole image towards teal and blue by isolating also my skin tones. Then I cleaned up the shadows with log wheels. Then I adjusted the hues, specifically the greens and yellows, basically desaturated them. Then I added a window in here just to make this part a bit brighter than everything else. Then I lifted up the shadows and compressed the highlights. And finally, I used the enhancer to add a bit of grain, bloom, and further compress the highlights or brightest parts of the image. Alright, let's move on to the next shot. I also have a reference frame for this one. Here it is. I think it's gonna work really well. I mean, the color grade of this frame, because the environment is pretty much the same. Alright, let's first add my basic node tree. Here I also have the same CST in and CST out. Then I have this noise reduction node, and here honestly I think I'm going to add noise reduction because I can see a lot of noise in here and also in here. So let's do that. I'm gonna go to the noise reduction page, increase the frames to 2, change this to better, leave this at medium, and I'm also going to disable this low pass filter, and I'm going to increase this slider in here until I see a significant change in the waveform. I learned this method from Darren Mostin on YouTube. He makes fantastic tutorials for Davinci Resolve. I highly recommend for you to watch his videos. So let me show you how it looks. As you can see, the more I slide it around, the more the waveform changes. But I want to find the sweet spot when it basically starts to change, which is somewhere around here, I guess. Maybe like 7. Let's do like 7. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the spatial noise reduction. I'm going to use enhanced this time and medium, and basically also move it until I see a significant change in the waveform, which is somewhere around here, I guess. And as you can see, the noise is pretty much gone. This is the before and after, before and after. Now, because applying noise reduction is quite heavy for the processor and GPU, if I'm going to play this clip back, it's going to lag. To fix that, I'm going to right click on this node, go to node cache, turn on cache, and let the computer render this node, and then everything is going to be smooth. Alright, with this done, let's move on to adjusting the contrast and exposure. And I think for this one, I'm going to use the color wheels to do that. So let's go here, bring down the lift, bring down the gamma to about here, and increase the gain to about here. This is the before and after. Let me open the reference frame. It's more or less the same in terms of exposure. Next, let me adjust the white balance. Honestly, because I'm going to push this clip towards these blues and greens, I don't really need to adjust the white balance, but because it's good practice, I'm still going to do it. So let me go to my offset in here, and I think this shot is a bit red, so I'm just going to reduce the red in here. This is the before and after, before and after. Now it looks a bit cleaner. And for the saturation, in this one, I'm actually going to increase the saturation. So let's go here and push it up to about here, I would say. Now it looks a bit closer to the reference clip. Now, as for skin tones, honestly, I think it looks good already. Let me see, qualifier. Yeah, it's pretty much on point in terms of like skin tones, but it is quite saturated, especially the hair in here. So I'm going to use these sliders in here to decrease the saturation on the hair. Yeah, just like so. And this is the before and after. Now it looks a bit more balanced overall. Next, I'm also going to delete the sharpness node because I don't want to add any sharpness to this shot. After the skin node, I'm going to add another node, which I'm going to also label grade. And here I'm also going to isolate these orange colors in here with the qualifier and push everything else towards these teal colors and also blue colors. So let me use the qualifier, qualify the hair in here, enable the overlay to see what I am doing. Disable the overlay, invert it again because I only want to affect everything outside these colors. Go to my color wheels, and I think this time I'm going to use the separate shadow meter and highlight wheels just to have a bit more control. So let me push the shadows towards teal green in here. Slightly decrease the green a bit. Let me open the reference frame. I'm just basically playing with all these colors in here, with all these sliders to see how it looks the best. Nothing really scientific in here. Okay, I'm kind of happy with this. It's not 100% the same, but it's pretty close, and I'm going to do some cleanup later on. First of all, let me clean up the shadows. Let me add another node, label it cleanup, and I'm going to use the log wheels to remove the blue tint in the shadows. Just like so. Also remove some of the red in here. As you can see, it makes quite big of a difference. And if I'm going to open the reference frame, it's now very similar, although I feel like the contrast is a bit stronger with the other clip. So let me increase the contrast here. Maybe I'm going to add another node actually and label it curves. Let's see how it looks now. A bit better. I'm still not crushing anything in here. It's still somewhat well exposed. Let me see with the qualifier. I mean, it is kind of dark in here. Okay, let's see now. It's fairly similar. Another thing I'm going to do is add another node, label it hues. What the hell is happening with Davinci Resolve? I cannot label my node. And I'm gonna go to my HSL curves, select mainly the greens and yellows and also the blues. Desaturate this a little bit. Play around with the colors here. Let's see if it looks somewhat similar. Okay, and honestly, I'm quite happy with this. It looks more or less the same. Maybe mine is a bit darker. So let me go here. Another thing I can do maybe is isolate the subject in here just to increase the exposure on her. So let me select this window node, select this pen tool. I'm going to increase the outside to about here, softness to about 20. Go to my color wheels and increase the exposure in the midtones and decrease it in the shadows. Something like this. So this is the before and after, before and after. Let me actually increase the softness even more. Okay, I kind of like this. Before and after, before and after. Actually, it's a bit too much. Let me go down a bit. Yeah, this looks good. Let me again see the reference frame. Let's go back to the grade node. Readjust everything a bit more. And honestly, this is as close as I can get the colors here Now, I don't think I'm going to fade the shadows and compress the highlights. I'm just going to delete this node, but I am going to add some bloom and film grain with the enhancer. Let me disable all this, increase this, go to bloom, use this preset, just zoom in a bit to see what I'm doing. Set it to somewhere around here, go to the film grain, enable it and adjust this. The grain on the reference frame is quite heavy. As you can see, it's very heavy actually. I'm going to set mine to 16 millimeters and leave it at around here. Actually slightly decrease it because it's a bit too strong for me. And honestly, this is as close as I can get with my limited amount of skills in Davinci Resolve. So again, let's break down everything I've done to this clip. First of all, I have the CST in and CST out. Then I applied some noise reduction to clean everything up. Then I adjusted the contrast and exposure. Then here I also have another contrast adjustment with curves. Here I adjusted the white balance. Here I increased the saturation. Here I fixed the saturation on her hair. Here I pushed the image towards blue teal colors. Here I cleaned up the shadows. Here I played around with the hues to make it look a bit more like the reference frame. And here I added a window around the subject just to make it a bit brighter. And finally, I used the enhancer to soften the shot with bloom, film grain, and also maybe, actually, I'm going to go to the film compression and compress the highlights a bit, just because I love this look. Something like this. But now I'm gonna go here and also increase the exposure in the white point just a bit, just to match it with the exposure of the reference frame. As you can see, it looks very, very similar. Not quite the same, not 100% the same, but very similar. Alright, I think I'm done for today, and honestly I'm quite impressed by how much I can push the Sony ZV-E10 footage around and still get fantastic results. It just goes to show you that it's not really important to have an expensive camera. What's more important is to expose your shot correctly, set the correct white balance, and also know how to use your editing software to get the best results from your clips. Anyhow, let me know down below if you have any questions, comments, or tips, and I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye!